Welcome to Disc 2 of Preparing for the Unexpected, the Drrm cycle. In this video, we are going to define DRRM, that is the Disaster Risk Reduction Management, and we'll review the DRRM cycle. When you're finished, you should be able to explain what DRRM is and how the DRRM cycle works. But let's start by reviewing the last video. In that video, we saw that natural hazards don't always result in a disaster. Much depends on things like location, that is, where did the hazard strike? Was it near us, far away, or somewhere else? The ability to avoid the hazard. Is there something we can do so we can go around the hazard and don't meet it? How and what can we build? Are there things that we can do in our community, like making our houses stronger or not building at the bottom of slopes where there might be a landslide that will allow us to avoid the disaster? How prepared are we? Do we know what we're going to do if we get into a flood? How resilient is our community? And we'll talk about that more later too. But let's start by defining DRRM, and we'll do that one letter at a time. First, the D, disaster. That's when a hazard strikes and overwhelms a community, state, or country. So what happens is it strikes in such a way that it's more than an individual or often a group or community can handle. Often they have to call for outside assistance. That's when something becomes a disaster. The R, disaster risk. That's the chance that the disaster will take place. Is this the same thing as the risk of being hit by a hazard? No, we may be hit by a hazard, but it doesn't have to turn into a disaster. The second R, disaster risk reduction. That's reducing the likelihood that a disaster will take place if we are hit by a hazard. And the last letter, the M, DRRM, disaster risk reduction management. And that's about us, how we plan so that we won't be hit so hard by a hazard. Let's go on and look at the DRRM cycle. That is, how do experts work within the cycle of disasters and hazards? The first two elements that we'll look at, mitigation and preparedness, take place before a disaster strikes, or that is before a hazard strikes. And the second two, response and recovery, happen after that hazard strikes. What are they? Mitigation, that makes our community strong so that the disaster won't hurt us. That's the building part. Do we make stronger buildings or houses? Are there regulations on that? Are there places where we are allowed to cut down trees? That's all a part of mitigation. Preparedness, be ready for the hazard. Everyone should know their part. That is important for saving lives and reducing the effects of any hazard. Then the hazard hits. That's when response begins. This is what we do when the hazard strikes. And finally, recovery. Now we work together to build back better. We'll have a stronger community in the end so that we're ready for the next hazard when it comes around. That all leads to a more resilient community. The second part, the second two elements, response and recovery, take place after we're struck by a hazard. Response is immediate. It shortens the term, while recovery is long-term. The focus in our next video will be on the pre-hazard events, that is, the mitigation and preparedness. Thank you very much.